All right. Cool. So today we wanted to talk about how like touch points will, if a deal cycle's super long or if we're trying to measure touch points, but they may span a year to 18 months, what does that look like? So today we have Kelly and Sierra to talk about this specifically with a client asking these questions, but obviously we'll try to expound on what that looks like. So uh, do one of you want to kind of give the scenario or kind of
Sure.
walk through what that looks like?
Yeah, sure. Um, the scenario we're, encountering is, um, like you said, Ian, there could be, long sales cycles or long sales windows, or maybe we don't even know what those sales cycles look like, but it's important to focus in or hyper focus in on touch points within the last 90 days as it relates to opportunity creation. We want to make sure it's only within those 90 days. We're trying to sort of take out the noise of touch points that are either longer or extend past those 90-day moments.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I put together a diagram here to uh, kind of an imaginary way of thinking of a deal and the way our standard process works and what that would look like. So we can use the 90-day time frame or adjust it to however many, but let's say, for example, the very first, because and keep in mind, right, this is all within the account, right? We're just talking about account ID attribution method. And that's in a different video that talks about those different attribution methods. But let's say that the very first, or I'm sorry, I have these mixed up here. Um, so our first touch happens in January. Lead creation happens shortly after that. And then we have, let's say, a bunch of touch points that happen in here all the way up until December. And then starting in January of 2023, we get an opportunity that's created per se, and then it closes in May. It's not uncommon for clients to say, well, I only want to have a look back window of, let's say, 90 days. So in this imaginary time frame, let's say this is 90 days, right? So really all we want to look at within those 90 days is going to be the number of touch points in there. And within our current model, so let's say if we chose a full path model. Full path model is going to weight this at, what is it? It's like 20, 20, 20, 20, 20, or it's actually 22.5. Let me change that up. It's 22.5, 22.5, 22.5, and then 22.5, right? And so that gives us 10% to work with at that point to distribute across all these. So at the end of the day, I mean, there's a lot of touch points in here. So you end up with a really small percentage sitting here, and you only calculate this. Let's use it. Let's just round up and pretend it's going to be, let's say, it's going to be about 29% when we calculate all the middle touches. So the 90-day look back window becomes really challenging because then we're only looking at 29% of the attribution there. Now that could be fine, it may not be, but it's going to change how someone looks at the engagement. And so rather than a client looking at, what I would recommend, rather than looking at a monetary amount across this, because it's hard to understand within reporting, it's hard to look at a monetary amount and know that that's only 29% of the engagement. So what I would recommend in a Dynamics report or in Salesforce report or CRM report is actually look at the touch point count or the touch point percentage, which would then give you this number here. so that you can actually say, okay, what's the influence? Because really what you're trying to, there's two ways to look at this. Yes, you have to report on revenue, but what I typically do with revenue is you still report on the 100% value or impact of the revenue, not the 29. So you say, as a marketing group, we had some form of influence over X number of dollars, whatever, but it's 100%, right? But we influenced it. We influenced it by 29. And you don't have to tell or state the 29%, but what you do in that 90-day look back window is you can say, what you then do is look at, okay, what were the main initiatives that happened in here? It could have been direct, could have been an event that happened, another direct traffic, right? And then it's a sales touch point, sales touch point. And so then you can actually look at what were the kind of the last engagements, because that's really what you're trying to measure, right? Is you're trying to understand what were those last meaningful engagements leading up to the close of an opportunity. Again, you can do this for op creation. You could look at this in different window sets, but that's kind of the methodology that would be in place, is looking at the percentage or count, not the actual dollar amount by that percentage. Does that thoughts, questions, emotional outburst?
That makes sense.
Boom. So the other option there, and cut me off anytime, is rather than using a full path, you can throw in your custom model, right? So let's say we take all this. Try not to erase anything that was part of that there. But if we did, rather than our full path, we can look at a custom model. And I actually really like this, and it just depends on what your effort is, what you're trying to do. But if in a full path model, you can assign a higher percentage to middle touches. So if you have really long sales cycles, or if you know you're only going to report on a 90-day window and your first touch and lead creation don't typically fit in that window, zero these bad boys out, right? Because at the end of the day, you still have first touch and lead creation as an attribution model. You can still look at those attribution models in your reports to be able to understand what of those efforts are creating valuable leads, what of those efforts are generating meaningful engagement from that first touch. You still have attribution models that will show you that, right? So you don't need to incorporate that if you're only going to look at a look back window of 90 days or however many days. So don't put the weighting over there, but enhance the weighting more so in this area. So again, you have your 90-day look back window, let's say. So this is your 90 days. Now this is going to cause me to have to do some math, but if let's say op creation is the way I can frame it, because again, this is a custom model. So if marketing wants to frame their model to be specific around marketing efforts, your marketing efforts, more often than not, sit within first touch lead creation, all these middle touches, and really after op creation, or even upon op creation to close, there's a lot more sales engagement. So they're going to be engaging with your content that you've created for sales, which is typically on your website, but it's a shift, right? Still valuable data. So I still keep this low, but you could change this to maybe 10%, 15%. And you could even do this as 10 or 15. Let's say this is 15%. So now we have 25% here. We can end up distributing 75% to all the middle touches. But what this enables us to be able to do here is give heavier weighting to what's happening in our look back window. Yes, it's going to get distributed across these as well, but it's also going to weight much heavier here. So let's say it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's 21. That could be off. Don't call me out too much on that, but I'm going to pull out my calculator. So that's 3.4. So now each of these is worth 3.4 rather than some really small number. And so you're working with a higher percentage to know where to invest all of these dollars. Where previously, because it was 10% across 21 or 20, was it 21? I'll just say 22 because that's what I did. 10%. Yeah, and those were two, right? Yeah. Yeah, so those become like 2% or whatever. So it really enhances or increases your value across all of those touch points. That's not right. I didn't do that right. So 22. Yeah, so it ends up being like 3.4. But yeah, rather than whatever it would be distributed like 0.2% of the other one. Does that make sense?
It does. What are some things to take into consideration if you're going and weighting your custom model this way?
I mean, it goes back to kind of the first point of like, what are you trying to measure? Are you trying to measure what is meaningful in that 90 days? And you just want to, what happens here in your reporting is in the previous model, you would have your different channels like direct, event, sales, and I don't know, ads. And what would happen there is your direct, your email, or your event, and then sales is like real big because you're only looking at a look back window that's fairly small, and it's predominantly sales touch points. And then your ads is like next to nothing because that was like that was early, right? Early on. Whereas in this model, it would look more like it would, direct, event, sales, ads. It looks a little bit more even like that. And ads is still 0, but in your look back window, your direct and event level out a little bit more. So when you look at a report and you're looking at percentages or looking at counts, you visually can identify what channels were effective in the 90-day window. Whereas here, it's harder to actually identify that from a visual standpoint within my reports to know what was most effective because the percentages are so low. So it's more of a visual and like aesthetically, it enables you to be able to identify where to continue to invest money or understand what marketing efforts are working.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, the other one would actually be 0.2, I think, is what it would have been. So this is now like 0.2, 0.2, 0.2, 0.2 across like, and then that was like 22.5. So yeah, again, like your sales would just be huge because it'd be 22% or 22.75, and all these are lower. Where now it's actually like, this is almost half. Like all your marketing initiatives are about what, 3, 6, 9. So it's like almost 10, 11 to 18. So like on a report, you can actually see there's a discrepancy there, but you can see your marketing efforts be a little bit more populated because that's what you want to know. You want to know what helped in the last 90 days, right? What was effective in the last 90 days? And again, if it's direct, then you would look at landing page effectiveness, right? Which you could easily flip to. Does that make sense?
It does.
Or any questions? Like any thoughts or pushback on that?
I don't see her. Do you have any questions?
Nope, I don't think so.
Cool.
Very
Awesome.
cool.
Cool. Yeah, thanks guys for bringing this up. Hopefully this is really helpful visually with that.